The film started in the bustling city of Madrid, where a city block was engulfed in a fierce fire. Police and emergency services were on the scene, evacuating residents from an apartment building. The flames were reaching higher and higher, threatening to consume the entire structure. The commanding officer gave the order for everyone to pull back, but one young police officer, against his superior's command, went back into the raging inferno. He was determined to save the remaining residents, but in a tragic turn of events, he was killed in the fire. His death served as a chilling and mysterious omen for the events to come. Several weeks passed. The film introduced Inspector Cosme, a weary but shrewd veteran of the police force who was approaching retirement and was also the father of the dead young police officer from the fire incident. He was now partnered with a young, eager inspector named David Valentin, a recent transfer to the Madrid precinct. Meanwhile, Cosme's son, Jorge Elias, a man with a passion for all things comic books and superheroes, was in his shop. He had just received a package containing a stun gun, a precaution against any potential robbers. Cosme and David were called to their first crime scene together. The body of a man named Balbino was found in his apartment, and it was a sight that no one could have prepared for. The body was grotesque, with gray, flaky skin, and his wrists and neck were brutally shattered. The victim, who was a scrawny scientist a year ago, now had a bodybuilder's physique. David was so taken aback by the gruesome scene that he had to rush to the bathroom to vomit. He was shaken to his core and had to take a moment to compose himself. While David was cleaning up, Cosme, who was a man of few words, asked him about his background. David revealed that he transferred to Madrid for a fresh start and that his parents had been murdered, while the murderer was never found. He added that he became a cop not out of a desire for revenge, but to do the right thing. Later, it was revealed that the investigation into Balbino's life revealed that he was a scientist, and his body's rapid and unnatural transformation into a muscular Hulk was a total mystery. To get some answers, the inspectors go to the autopsy room to meet with Dr. Jonathan Bruguera, a forensic doctor. Bruguera, a man with a macabre sense of humor, explained that the victim's body was pumped full of steroids and other muscle-building substances. The man was so bloated with muscle that his skin couldn't keep up, giving him a pale gray and almost translucent appearance. Bruguera concluded that the victim was forced to continuously lift weights until he died from exhaustion. The killer also injected him with a substance that changed his skin's pigment. It's a truly bizarre case, and the inspectors had no idea what they were up against. The head of the homicide department, Norma, a top graduate of the police academy with a surprising love for cosplay, arrived at the precinct. She was a no-nonsense boss, and she quickly reminded Cosme that he was nearing retirement and that he should start packing up his desk. David, still new to Madrid, pleaded with Norma to keep Cosme on the case, arguing that his experience was invaluable. Norma, however, dismissed David's pleas and firmly told Cosme to back off the investigation. That night, while working out in a boxing gym, David received a call about a new murder. The crime scene was a museum, and the victim was Felix, a man who sold collector-grade weapons online. The body was found in a suit of armor, but his chest was riddled with holes, and cables were connected to his body as if they were a hole for a reactor, referring to the superhero Iron Man. His actual heart was missing, and a note with the word suspense was found behind his neck. Meanwhile, back at home, Cosme was having dinner with his son, Jorge, a die-hard comic book fan. Jorge saw a photo of the first victim, Balbino, and immediately recognized the reference Hulk. He pointed out that the first version of the Hulk was gray, not green, and that Balbino's gray skin and massive body were a direct recreation of the Incredible Hulk's origin story. He also noted that Iron Man's first armor was gray, which was a subtle hint at what was to come. The next morning, Cosme went to Norma's office and saw the photos of the second victim. The word suspense caught his eye, and he realized the significance of Jorge's words. He rushed to the crime scene and found another clue, a small piece of paper with the words Orígenes Secretos and Incredible Hulk written on it. Cosme's theory was right on the money. The killer was recreating superhero origin stories. He explained to Norma that the first murder was the Hulk's origin, and the second was Iron Man's, a man in armor with a heart condition. Norma, who was impressed with Cosme's theory, agreed to bring Jorge on as a consultant. David wasn't on it for the die-hard comic fan to join the investigation, but his knowledge was essential, and he had to accept that decision. They all went to the second crime scene, where Jorge immediately recognized that all the weapons were replicas from famous movies like Kill Bill and Game of Thrones. He also found something strange. An ordinary axe was sitting among the replicas of the Lord of the Rings weapons. David, who was still skeptical of Jorge's help, went to inspect the axe and found fingerprints on it, which was a major break in the case. The fingerprints from the axe were sent to Bruguera in the forensics lab. He felt a bit uneasy, noting that the killer seemed to be deliberately leaving clues, almost as if they wanted the police to find them. While they waited for the results, David went to Jorge's shop to pick up comics. Jorge, a true fan, had already gone through his collection and selected comics featuring science-based superheroes, leaving out those with magical or godly origins like Doctor Strange, Thor, or Wonder Woman. The thought was that the killer's mind was purely scientific and that those origins would be too difficult to replicate. Later, they met with Norma, who was also a huge cosplay fanatic. She admitted that she only watched movies and anime for inspiration and never read comics, which was a new piece of the puzzle. David spent the next few days trying to understand the comics and the killer's mindset, but he found it difficult. To him, they were just ridiculous stories with no rhyme or reason, but his frustration was cut short when Norma called with the fingerprint results. They belonged to a firefighter named Jordi. David and Jorge immediately headed to Jordi's apartment. As they approached, they saw a strange white vapor pouring from a broken window. When they got inside, the temperature was so cold that they could see their breath. The extreme temperature change had caused the window to shatter. They found Jordi in a chilling scene. His body was in a tube, on fire. It was the third murder, a horrifying recreation of the Human Torch's origin story. Jorge explained that in the comics, the original Human Torch was an android who caught fire when exposed to air. After the body was taken to the morgue, Bruguera, who was horrified by the sight, explained that Jordi had been burned alive for 3 days. His body had been covered in a special material that kept him from dying instantly, and he had been fed through tubes. The killer was clearly experimenting on his victims, testing how long they could survive under extreme conditions. David, who was frustrated with Norma's lack of support, confronted her and pleaded with her to bring Cosme back onto the case. David argued that Cosme, as a seasoned veteran, would be a huge help. Norma, however, was resolute in her decision to keep Cosme from the case. The argument escalated, and Norma finally revealed the shocking truth. Cosme had an incurable form of cancer, and she had forced him to retire so he could enjoy his last days. Cosme had kept this a secret from everyone, including his son Jorge, to spare him the pain. David, seeing his mentor's sacrifice, argued that Cosme would rather die on the job than live out his last days in a state of boredom. The next day, a somber David visited Cosme's house for dinner. The atmosphere was tense. David, trying to ease the mood, praises Cosme's late son, the police officer who died in the fire, as a hero. But Jorge, Cosme's other son, was visibly upset. He reveals that he didn't get along with his older brother, who was always ordering him to leave the room and touch some grass. He felt his father, Cosme, always defended his brother. David, understanding the family's grief and strained relationship, told Jorge that he was lucky to have a father and brother who cared about him, even if they had a complicated relationship. David then shared his own painful story. He was an only child who had been alone since he was 8, when his parents were shot and killed as they left a movie theater. The tragic story was a chilling parallel to the origin of Batman. Moved by David's story, Jorge, filled with empathy, pledged to help him solve his parents' murder case. With Norma's help, they accessed the cold case files from 1989. Jorge, using his expertise, found a piece of paper in the file that he instantly recognized as a page from Detective Comics number 33, which details Batman's origin. He realized that the killer from David's past was the same serial killer they were hunting now. The killer deliberately recreated Batman's origin story. This revelation rocked David to his core. However, David was still skeptical. He believed trying to guess the killer's next move by picking random comic books was a lost cause, especially since the killer had the resources to pull off such elaborate murders. But Jorge was undeterred. He noticed a crucial detail. All 4 comics the killer has referenced were extremely rare, original editions published between 60 and 80 years ago. These comics cost a fortune, with a single copy selling for at least €1 million. This means the killer was not just a geek, but a wealthy one. Jorge took David to meet his friend Paco, a collector with an almost complete collection of every superhero comic ever made. Jorge was so committed to helping David that he offered Paco a rare comic of his own in exchange for information. After a tense moment, Paco revealed that only one person in Madrid had the original editions of all 4 comics. a wealthy real estate developer named Victor. David, now with a solid lead, was determined to catch the killer that very night. He dropped Jorge off at home, intending to confront Victor alone. But Jorge, who knew David better than anyone, immediately called Norma and told her to follow him. When David arrived at Victor's place, he broke in and found a massive room filled with superhero memorabilia, including photos and articles of all the murders, both those that had been committed and those that were planned. But as David looked at a wall of murder plans, he realized something was missing. There was nothing about Batman. Suddenly, a strange gas filled the room. It was a trap. Victor was already dead, having been killed by a hallucinogenic gas. The real killer, wearing a menacing mask and using a voice changer, introduced himself as Professor Navarro. David, now under the influence of the gas, struggled to fight. His hallucinations made Professor Navarro appear even more menacing and powerful. David was fighting a losing battle, as the killer seemed to be one step ahead of him, just as he had been with all the murders. Not long after, Norma arrived and without hesitation shot at Professor Navarro. The bullet ricocheted off his iron mask, and he managed to escape into the night. The next day, the police investigated Victor's house and found that, although he was a millionaire, half of his fortune had been mysteriously cashed out in recent years. They searched all of his properties but found no clues as to the killer's identity. Meanwhile, Jorge and David were still trying to figure out the killer's next move. Jorge pointed out that the killer had yet to recreate the origins of Spider-Man from Amazing Fantasy and the X-Men from Uncanny, and they still had an empty spot on the wall for the Batman comic. David and Norma then met with Bruguera, who had autopsied Victor's body. Bruguera told them that Victor was embalmed and had been dead for 4 to 5 years. He explained that the killer, Professor Navarro, had been living and stealing Victor's identity for years. To make matters even more bizarre, traces of polonium-210, a deadly radioactive substance, were found in Victor's body. Ignoring Norma's orders, David called Cosme to discuss the case. David was still trying to figure out why the killer, who had been impersonating Victor for years, would suddenly reveal himself by leaving clues. At that moment, a new murder broke on the news. A 16-year-old boy was found hanged from the ceiling, with his hands tied and strange bite marks on his body. Jorge immediately recognized the murder as a recreation of the origin of Spider-Man. The killer's pattern became clearer, and it was revealed that the killer was indeed recreating the origins of superheroes. David met with Jorge at his comic book shop, and Jorge told him his theory. He said that the killer, who saw himself as a supervillain, was trying to create a superhero to fight him. He believed that Professor Navarro was the one who killed David's parents, and had been committing these murders to force David to become the Batman and solve the case. David, who was now emotional, snapped at Jorge, revealing that his father, Cosme, was terminally ill. Jorge, who was shocked by the news, immediately went to his father and apologized. Cosme, however, reassured his son that he was proud of him and his late brother for each having their own path in life. Jorge then revealed his secret, a hidden room in his shop where he kept his brother's police uniform. He told his father that he always considered his brother a hero. That night, at Jorge's comic book shop, a birthday party was in full swing. Everyone, including David, was in costume. Jorge had even given David a superhero name, Vertex. David, now more emotionally stable, apologized to Jorge for his earlier outburst. Jorge, in turn, told him his analysis of the case. He believed that the killer's next murder would be based on the X-Men comics, Uncanny, and that the killer would most likely target people close to the hero, in this case, David. David, with a chilling sense of dread, immediately thought of Norma and tried to call her, but her phone was not active. At the same time, Cosme had gone to the police station to look for clues on his own. He found something strange in the data he had collected. But before he could act on it, Professor Navarro appeared, attacked him, and kidnapped him. An hour later, Norma arrived at the party in a panic. She told David that Cosme was missing. Soon after, Navarro called David and told him that he had poisoned the party's lemon punch with radioactive polonium. He gave David an ultimatum: come to the city reservoir alone, or Cosme would be killed, and the city's water supply would be contaminated with the deadly substance. Just then, the party guests who had drunk the punch began to fall to the floor. Norma, who was still trying to get a police team to go with David, was furious when David refused. He knew he had to go alone to save Cosme and the city's residents. Jorge, always looking for a hidden clue, saw an X mark under the punch bowl and a torn comic book page. He knew that the killer was recreating the X-Men's origin story, where radioactive material turned ordinary people into mutants. In a moving moment, Jorge handed David his late brother's police uniform and the stun gun he had bought for self-defense. David combined the uniform with his costume, creating a new superhero persona, Vertex. He was no longer just a detective. He was now a hero. On the other hand, Cosme woke up in a wheelchair, a recreation of Professor X, and found himself face to face with the killer. The mask was off, and the killer's identity was finally revealed. It was Bruguera, the forensic doctor. Cosme explained that he had figured it out when he discovered Victor's medical file, where Bruguera had declared Victor permanently disabled 5 years ago, a lie to cover up his murder. Bruguera was impressed and explained his twisted plan. He said he wanted to create the world's first true superhero to fight the system, which he saw as corrupt and without faith in justice. He saw David as the perfect subject, a man whose parents were murdered, much like Batman's. Bruguera revealed that he had not killed David's parents. He had only planted the comic book page in the cold case file a month ago to tie David to his crimes. Bruguera confessed that he was so obsessed with creating a hero that he knew he had to die for David to truly be born. On the way to the city reservoir, David, who was traveling with Norma in her car, pretended that the car had a mechanical issue and then left her behind when she checked outside. He wanted to face Bruguera alone to protect her. At the reservoir, Bruguera explained to Cosme that all of his victims had committed heinous crimes, and he felt his actions were justified. He then explained his final plan. He would die mysteriously, so David would be forced to seek justice against all criminals, not just Bruguera. With that, he poured a corrosive liquid on his face to destroy his identity. As David arrived, Bruguera shot Cosme dead, making sure David saw it. David, now filled with rage, fought Bruguera. He managed to pull off the killer's mask, revealing his destroyed face. Bruguera, who was pleased with his new identity, laughed as he fell backward toward a tank of corrosive liquid. He pretended to ask for David's help, but David, consumed by anger, let him fall. Bruguera's body disappeared without a trace. 3 months later, with Cosme's funeral, Jorge, devastated by the loss of his father and brother, attended the funeral alone. Bruguera was listed as a missing person. David, Norma, and Jorge were all working together, looking for a secret hideout. They found a clue that led them to Victor's mansion. Jorge, using his knowledge of comics, found a secret basement by moving the hands of a grandfather clock to 1010, a reference to Batman's origin. Inside, they found a huge secret lair with a super sophisticated computer and a massive pile of money. The film ended with David deciding to use the lair and its resources to continue his mission as the superhero Vertex with the help of Norma and Jorge.